The cold February wind sliced across the concrete courtyard as Linda Parker stepped through the outer gates of Blackridge Maximum Security Prison for the very first time. The moment the metal door clanged shut behind her, the sound echoed like a verdict, one that reminded her she wasn't just walking into a workplace, but a world where hope rarely survived. She tightened her uniform jacket, trying to steady her breath. 5 years in the general ward had prepared her for plenty of things, but not for this place. Nothing really prepared you for this. Beside her, Warden Robert Hayes moved with an almost military rigidity. His boots hit the ground in sharp, controlled steps, the kind of gait that told you he'd spent decades mastering power in confined spaces. "This unit runs on discipline," he said, his deep voice bouncing off the high concrete walls. "No slip-ups, no exceptions. Everyone in here is capable of killing you, and some would do it gladly." He didn't look at her. He didn't have to. The message was meant to sink in, not to be softened. They entered the main corridor, and the smell hit her first. A mixture of chlorine, sweat, damp stone, and something metallic she couldn't quite name. The overhead lights flickered in long, uneven pulses, casting thin bars of shadow across the floor. The prison felt alive in its own way, breathing heavily through the vents and humming with the sound of distant machinery. As they walked, Linda felt eyes on her. Inmate eyes, some curious, some indifferent, some cold and calculating. A new guard was always an event. She kept her shoulders straight, her face unreadable, just as she'd been trained. But inside, her heart was beating harder with every step deeper into this place. When they reached the third tier, Hayes handed her a ring of heavy keys, the kind that felt more like a burden than a tool. "Your post is cell block C," he said. "Solitary tier. The inmates here earn their privileges through good behavior. Don't let that fool you. Keep your distance. Keep your head." Then he left her there alone, his footsteps fading into the hum of the hallway. The silence on the tier was almost suffocating. No shouting, no noise, just the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the faint reverberation of doors settling in their frames. Linda walked slowly, taking in the bleak symmetry of barred doors and narrow windows. Then, as she passed cell 312, something unexpected drifted through the air. A soft humming. Calm. Melodic. She paused. From behind the steel door, someone was playing a haunting tune. Beethoven, if she wasn't mistaken. The notes felt impossibly out of place in a place built of fear and concrete. She leaned closer before catching herself. What kind of man hums Beethoven in a place like this? She didn't know yet, but soon, the answer would unravel her entire life. When Linda returned to cell block C the next morning, she tried to convince herself that yesterday's unease would fade, that the humming she heard at cell 312 was nothing more than a curious detail in an otherwise grim place. But as she walked the tier, checking each door, she felt that same strange pull toward the center of the hallway, toward him. Cell 312. She paused only for a second, but it was enough. A calm voice drifted through the small observation window. "Good morning, officer." Linda blinked, startled. She wasn't used to hearing courtesy in this unit, much less warmth. She stepped closer, instinctively keeping her tone professional. "State your name and number." A figure stepped into the thin band of light coming from the hallway. Tall, straight posture, dark hair neatly kept despite the circumstances. He stood with a kind of quiet dignity she hadn't seen in a prison uniform before. "Adrian Cole, inmate 24813. His voice was smooth, almost disarming, too gentle for someone accused of murder and armed robbery. She expected hostility or manipulation, but instead she got calm. His cell was spotless, sheets tucked tightly, books stacked in near-perfect alignment. A detailed pencil sketch lay on the desk, a woman's face captured with breathtaking precision. Most inmates spent their solitary time pacing, shouting, or sleeping. But Adrian looked like he'd been plucked out of university library and dropped into concrete hell. "You're new here," he said lightly, though his eyes were studying everything, her stance, her breathing, even the way she held the keys. "It must be overwhelming at first." Linda stiffened. Focus on your own concerns, not mine. But he only smiled, a small, knowing curve of the lips. I assure you, Officer Parker, I have plenty of time to observe the world from in here. She meant to move on, to remind herself that attachments were dangerous. Yet something about his eyes held her still, bright, intelligent, almost transparent in their clarity. They didn't look like the eyes of a man who pulled a trigger in cold blood. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of her. In the staff room, she quietly requested his file. His mugshot told a different story. Sharper jawline, expensive suit, the look of a man who once lived above the world he now sat beneath. A former financial analyst, Yale graduate, multiple trips to Europe. Everything about him suggested success, until the day he walked into a bank with a gun and left a guard dead. Her fingers brushed the paperwork, unable to reconcile the man in the photo with the man humming Beethoven behind steel bars. When her shift ended, she passed cell 312 again. Adrian sat by the window, the golden winter sunset outlining his silhouette. He turned his head slightly, almost sensing her presence. And for a moment, just one, Linda felt something dangerous flicker inside her. A connection she had no right to feel. She walked away quickly, but the question followed her all the way home. How could a man with eyes like that become a killer? Linda told herself it was nothing, just curiosity, the kind anyone would feel when meeting an inmate who didn't fit the mold. But over the next week, she found her steps slowing every time she passed cell 312, her ears unconsciously searching for that soft humming or the rustle of pages turning. She didn't want to admit it, but Adrian Cole had carved out a space in her mind, in a way no prisoner ever had. It began with simple exchanges. A polite good morning, a quiet nod. Then came small conversations, safe ones, harmless ones, about the books he was reading or the sketches he made to pass the endless hours. Linda should have kept it brief. She knew the rules better than anyone. But somehow, Adrian made every moment feel suspended, like the world narrowed to just his calm voice and her racing heartbeat. One afternoon, as she walked by, she saw him sitting cross-legged on the floor with a stack of magazines spread around him. Impressionism, he said without looking up, as though continuing a conversation they hadn't started yet. Did you know Renoir used to paint with broken brushes because he claimed imperfections made the strokes more alive? Linda blinked. You read art theory? He finally looked at her, eyes warm with the quiet excitement of someone sharing a secret. No, I lived it. Paris has a strange way of teaching you things you didn't know you were learning. It was such a simple sentence, but something in his tone, nostalgic, gentle, pulled her closer. Against her better judgment, she stepped nearer to the door. You've been to Paris? 3 times, he replied, smiling like the memory still tasted sweet. Venice twice. Florence once. Beautiful places, Officer Parker. Places that make you feel human in ways this world often forgets. Human. The word lodged itself in Linda's chest. In a job built on distrust and control, she rarely heard that word spoken sincerely. Their conversations grew longer. Linda found herself choosing the longer route down the tier so she could pass his cell twice instead of once. Adrian noticed, of course. Men like him always noticed, but he never pushed. He simply offered pieces of himself the way a skilled musician plays the opening notes of a song, inviting you to lean in a little closer. And she did. She started noticing things she shouldn't. The way his voice softened when discussing philosophy. The way his eyes darkened when he talked about mistakes he refused to elaborate on. The way he seemed to see her, not just the uniform, but the person inside it, tired and lonely and carrying more weight than she let on. One evening, when she paused by his door, Adrian closed the book he was reading and said quietly, "You don't belong in a place like this." She swallowed. "I'm a correctional officer. This is exactly where I belong." He tilted his head slightly, studying her, seeing too much. "No," he said softly. "Your soul is too loud for a place built on silence." The words hit her harder than they should have. She felt the ground shift under her feet, just a little, but enough to know she was already slipping. And as she walked away, heart pounding, one terrifying truth echoed in her mind. She wasn't just curious anymore. She was drawn to him. Dangerously so. Dr. Hannah Reed had always been the kind of psychologist who noticed everything. Every shift in posture, every hesitation in a voice, every tiny change in routine. In a place like Black Ridge Maximum Security, those details could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. And with Linda Parker, the changes came fast enough that Hannah couldn't ignore them. One late afternoon, Linda was stirring a lukewarm cup of coffee in the staff lounge when Hannah walked in. The psychologist's calm expression never gave much away, but her eyes were sharp, always taking inventory. "How's the high-security unit treating you so far?" she asked casually. "It's fine," Linda replied, trying to keep her tone steady. "Actually quieter than I expected." Hannah raised an eyebrow. Barely a movement, but enough to make Linda tense. "Quiet can be good," she said softly, "unless someone starts spending more time in places they don't need to be." Linda froze for a fraction of a second. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "The library," Hannah said, still in that calm, almost gentle tone. "Very few officers volunteer to cover that post. But you seem unusually eager." Linda forced a small, dismissive breath. "I like books. That's all." Hannah didn't argue. She simply watched Linda with that unnerving look that made people feel as though their thoughts were being peeled open. "Books are good, but emotional overreach." She shook her head slightly. "That can destroy a career in this place." Something in Linda snapped. She stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping the linoleum floor. "I know my boundaries," she said, voice tight. Then she walked out before Hannah could say another word, though her chest was burning with a mix of fear and defensiveness. Hannah wasn't wrong, and Linda knew it. But Adrian was different. He didn't fit into the categories of manipulation or danger. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. When Linda arrived at the library later that day, Adrian was already there, sitting by the barred window, sunlight washing over his face. He closed his copy of Hemingway and gave her a small smile, the kind that felt too real in a place built on lies. "I never thought I'd read this again while locked up," he said. "Funny how old stories find us when we need them most." The way he spoke, gentle, reflective, pulled Linda in deeper. They talked again, losing track of time. About art, about Venice, about the kind of life that felt a million miles away from concrete walls and cell doors. When their fingers brushed as she handed him a book, Linda felt a spark shoot straight through her. Adrian's eyes held hers, warm and knowing. "Don't let this place put out your light," he whispered. The words wrapped around her like a spell. Simple, soft, and dangerously comforting. Linda left the library with her heart racing, trying to convince herself that Hannah Reed was overreacting, that she, Linda, was still in control. But deep down, she felt the truth creeping in. She was already crossing a line, and she didn't know how to step back anymore. The library became their sanctuary before Linda even realized it. On paper, she was simply the officer assigned to supervise inmate reading hours twice a week. But in reality, those hours had turned into something far more dangerous, an escape neither of them should have allowed. Adrian was always there before she arrived, sitting at the same corner table, posture relaxed but eyes alert the moment she walked in. He never said anything inappropriate, never crossed a line outright. Instead, he played a subtler game, one built on quiet glances, warm tones, and stories that made Linda feel as if the world outside the concrete walls still belonged to her. One Thursday afternoon, sunlight spilled through the barred windows, painting long golden stripes across the dusty shelves. Adrian held a tattered art book in his hands, his fingers tracing the edge of a Monet painting. "You know," he began softly, "I used to dream about taking someone to see water lilies in person. The real ones, not the reproductions." Linda swallowed. "Most people dream of beaches or vacations. You dream of museums." "Museums," he said with a soft laugh, "are where souls go to breathe." That line shouldn't have affected her, but it did. It struck something tender inside her, something she'd forgotten she still had. And that was how it started. Not with a touch, not at first, but with shared moments that felt too intimate to be allowed. Soon Linda found herself making excuses to take the library post more often. She brought in magazines from the city library. Sometimes she'd linger after hours, shelving books slower than necessary, just to hear Adrian's voice a little longer. Then came the first moment when the air between them shifted. He handed her a folded page, the corner of a poem he'd copied. Their fingers brushed, a small, barely their moment, but Linda felt it like static racing across her skin. Adrian held the contact just a second too long, his eyes searching hers with a softness she wasn't prepared for. "You deserve more than this place gives you," he murmured. Her breath hitched. "Adrian, we shouldn't." "Shouldn't what?" His voice dropped lower, intimate. "Feel something human?" The words landed with the quiet force of truth. Because that's what this was, human. Messy, forbidden, reckless, and very, very human. Days blurred into weeks, and each stolen moment pulled them closer. Notes tucked inside books. Sketches of her slipped under the edge of his bunk. Conversations that simmered with unspoken longing. One evening, as Linda reached for a book on the top shelf, Adrian stepped behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath on her neck. "Careful," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Shelves like these, they hide dangerous things." She turned slightly, heart pounding. "And what about you?" A slow, deliberate smile crossed his face. "I think you already know." The distance between them vanished before either could stop it. Their lips met, soft, desperate, wrong in every way imaginable. The library, once just part of her job, became the place where she crossed a line she could never uncross. And as she walked out that night, adrenaline still buzzing through her veins, Linda finally understood the truth. She wasn't just slipping anymore. She was falling. Adrian's mask didn't crack all at once. It shifted slowly, small fractures spreading just beneath the surface, until the charming, poetic inmate Linda thought she knew was replaced by someone far more calculated. It began the day he was denied parole. Linda found him in the library, sitting dead still, a book open but unread in front of him. His posture was tense, jaw tight, eyes colder than she'd ever seen. When she approached, he didn't greet her, didn't smile, didn't soften. "What happened?" she asked gently. He dropped the book onto the table with a hollow thud. "9 more years," he said flatly. "That's what they think I deserve." Linda's chest tightened. She reached for his arm, but he pulled away sharply, the rejection startling her. This wasn't the Adrian who talked about Venice or art. This Adrian felt like a stranger. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He gave her a bitter laugh. "You're sorry?" "No, you're naive." The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back, confused. "What are you talking about?" Adrian looked around the empty library, making sure they were alone. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled something from his pocket, a small black cell phone. Illegal. Dangerous. Enough to end her career instantly. Linda's breath froze in her throat. "I've been recording things," he said, unlocking the screen. "Documenting us." Images flashed by. Notes. Sketches. A photo of their first kiss. A video clip of her brushing her hand against his. Things that on their own seemed harmless. But in a prison? A scandal. A crime. "You wouldn't," she whispered. She wanted to believe it. Needed to believe it. "Oh, but I would," Adrian replied, leaning in close. His voice was soft, almost tender, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable. "I have nothing to lose. You, on the other hand, your job, your freedom, everything." Linda felt the room tilt. This wasn't love. This wasn't even affection. This was leverage. He continued, voice low. "You're going to help me get out of here. Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon. I have a plan. You're part of it." Her pulse roared in her ears. She shook her head. "Adrian, this isn't." "Don't interrupt me," he snapped, eyes flashing. "You think you were special? You think I bare my soul to you?" He gave a cruel smile. "There are women like you in every facility. Lonely, desperate for connection, easy to pull in." The words cut deeper than any knife. Linda staggered back, the truth unraveling inside her. Every compliment, every poem, every stolen moment, none of it was real. She wasn't the exception. She was the target. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do as I say, and no one ever sees the evidence. Refuse. He lifted the phone between them. And your life ends where mine began. Something inside Linda cracked, not loudly, not violently, but with a quiet, devastating finality. The adoration she once felt turned to a sickening mixture of betrayal and fear. As she left the library, his words followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. She thought she had found someone who understood her. Instead, she had fallen into the hands of a master manipulator. And now, he owned her. The laundry room was always loud, so loud that most officers avoided it unless absolutely necessary. The constant roar of industrial washers and dryers swallowed every sound, every voice, every thought. It was the one place in Blackridge where a person could scream and no one would hear a thing. And on that Wednesday evening, it became the place where Linda Parker's life split in two. Adrian was working alone, just as Linda knew he would be. He stood beside a table stacked with freshly folded sheets, humming under his breath like nothing in the world was wrong. As if he hadn't spent the last 3 days cornering her with threats, manipulating her into silence, or dangling her future over a cliff edge. When he saw Linda step inside, he smirked, calm, confident, victorious. "I knew you'd come around," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "I told you you're smarter than the rest." She didn't answer. Her fingers curled tight around the edge of the doorway, the metal biting into her skin. She could still feel the weight of the invisible chains he'd wrapped around her, the photos, the videos, the letters. Adrian owned her, controlled her, and he knew it. "Don't look so nervous," he continued, walking toward her with that same charming ease she once mistook for gentleness. "You help me, we both walk away clean. You don't help me," he let the sentence hang, tapping the breast pocket where the contraband phone was hidden. "You already know what happens then." Linda felt her throat tighten. Her pulse hammered so violently it hurt. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I need the key to the south exit. And your badge. Just for a few hours. After that," he smiled, "we'll disappear. Together. Isn't that what you wanted?" He reached out to touch her cheek, an intimate gesture he once used to make her heart race. But this time, Linda flinched away as though his hand were aflame. His smile faded. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Behind him, on a metal rack, the wrench gleamed under the fluorescent light. Heavy, solid, within reach. For a long moment, Linda couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All she saw was everything she stood to lose. Her job, her freedom, her life. All because she let a man behind bars rewrite her reality. Adrian turned his back, reaching for the stack of sheets, speaking over his shoulder as if giving instructions to a subordinate. "We start tomorrow. I'll tell you exactly what." That was the moment something inside Linda snapped. She grabbed the wrench. Her breath shook. Her vision blurred. "Adrian," she said, her voice barely audible. He turned, annoyance flickering across his face, right before the steel connected with his temple. The sound was sickeningly dull, but the machines drowned it out. Adrian's body collapsed instantly, legs folding beneath him. Linda stared in horror, but the terror pushing through her was stronger than the guilt. When he groaned and tried to lift his head, she swung again, and again, and again. By the 5th blow, the floor was splattered. Adrian lay still, motionless, finally silent. Linda dropped the wrench, her breath ragged. She wiped the handle clean with trembling hands, placing it back exactly where it had been. Then she checked the hallway camera, knowing it rarely recorded at this hour, and fixed a laundry log, slipping the name of inmate Daryl Johnson as if he'd been there the entire time. In less than 10 minutes, she walked out looking exactly like every other officer finishing a shift. But inside, something fundamental had shattered. She had killed the man who manipulated her. And now, she would have to kill the lies he left behind. Detective Marcus Lewis arrived at Blackridge Maximum Security the next morning with the kind of quiet presence that made people straighten their backs without realizing why. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't bark orders, but the intensity in his eyes said he missed nothing. And when a body turned up in a prison laundry room with a shattered skull, Marcus was the kind of man they called. The warden walked him through the unit, explaining the official version of events. According to the logs, inmate Daryl Johnson, violent, unpredictable, known for fights, had been assigned laundry duty the day before. According to staff statements, Johnson and Adrian Cole had argued in the cafeteria 2 days earlier. According to everything on paper, the case wrote itself. But Marcus never trusted cases that looked too clean. In the laundry room, he crouched beside the dark, dried stain on the concrete floor. He was hit here, he murmured, tracing the direction of the blood spatter. And here, and here. No defensive marks around the room. No overturned carts. No torn clothes. He straightened slowly. Quiet. Too quiet for a fight with a man like Johnson. Warden Hayes cleared his throat. Killers don't always struggle. Marcus glanced at him. Killers don't usually put the weapon back where it belongs either. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. The wrench sat on its shelf, clean except for the dried blood that forensics had already marked with tape. Marcus approached it, examining the position. You're telling me Johnson beat a man to death and then neatly returned the tool to its place? His tone wasn't accusatory, just deeply skeptical. Hayes didn't respond. Marcus walked the room again, more slowly this time. He noted the cameras, 2 hallways, both functioning live but not recording. When did the storage drives fail? He asked. 2 days ago, Hayes muttered. Convenient, Marcus replied. He spent the next hours interviewing guards. Most were stiff, vague, and overly rehearsed. The inmates were worse. Shrugs, fear, denial. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. It was like the murder had happened in a vacuum. And vacuum murders never existed. When Marcus finally sat down with Linda Parker, she looked collected, too collected. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, as Marcus asked gentle but pointed questions. How well did you know Adrian Cole? I supervised him in the library, Linda answered quickly. That's all. What was he like? Quiet. Respectful. He stayed out of trouble. Marcus watched her carefully. She didn't break eye contact, but he noticed the subtle tremor in her right hand, the way her fingertips kept brushing the hem of her sleeve. Guilt lived in the body long before it reached the voice. That night, Marcus reviewed the statements in his temporary office. Something was off. Something big. The fight between Johnson and Adrian was too convenient. The logs were too clean. The scene was too staged. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Hannah Reed stepped inside, her expression serious. I think you should see this, she said, placing a stack of notes on his desk. These are my last sessions with Adrian. His behavior changed drastically the week before he died. Marcus skimmed the pages, agitated mood, secretive comments, hints of planning something, even references to needing cooperation. Cooperation from who? Marcus asked. Hannah hesitated. I don't know yet, but Adrian wasn't acting alone. As she left, Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. The story he'd been handed was not the truth, and whoever killed Adrian Cole had done everything in their power to bury it. Too perfectly. Far too perfectly. Linda lasted 4 more days before the weight of everything she'd done began crushing her from the inside out. She went to work, clocked in, walked the halls, and pretended nothing had changed, but her body betrayed her. Her hands trembled when she held her keys. Her breathing hitched every time Marcus Lewis appeared in her peripheral vision. And every night, she lay awake replaying the moment the wrench connected with Adrian's skull, hearing the sickening thud over and over again. By the 5th day, she could barely keep herself upright. Detective Marcus Lewis requested a follow-up interview that morning. Linda told herself it was routine, that he was talking to everyone again. But her heart knew better. And the moment she stepped into the small, dimly lit office, she felt the air close around her like a fist. Marcus sat across from her, calm, composed, and impossible to read. I appreciate you coming back, he said, clicking his pen once. I just want to clarify a few points. Linda nodded, but her throat had gone dry. He started gently, asking about schedules, cameras, and the inmates assigned to laundry duty. She answered, short, controlled responses memorized overnight. But then Marcus shifted his approach, leaning forward slightly. Officer Parker, he said quietly, I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I'm here to understand what really happened. She forced a swallow. I already told you what I know. You told me what you could, Marcus corrected. But your body language is telling me something different. Linda stiffened. He continued, patient but relentless. You jump at certain questions. You look away when I mention the laundry room. Your hands never stop fidgeting when I bring up Adrian Cole. Her fingers froze where they were twisting the edge of her sleeve. Marcus placed a small folder on the table. And then there's this. Inside were copies of Adrian's sketches, found hidden under his mattress. All of them were drawings of Linda, the curve of her jaw, the way she held a book, even the shape of her smile. Each sketch was intimate in a way that no inmate should have access to. I'm not judging you, Marcus said softly. I've been doing this long enough to know when someone is being manipulated. Adrian wasn't the man he pretended to be. And whatever happened in that laundry room, you don't have to keep it inside. For the first time, her breath cracked. She felt it, the wall inside her breaking, the truth clawing its way out. Her voice came out small and shaking. He threatened me. Marcus didn't move, didn't press, just waited. Linda's eyes filled. He had a phone, pictures, messages, everything. He said he'd ruin me, said I'd lose my job, go to prison. I believed him. God, I believed every word. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She covered her face with both hands. Marcus's tone stayed calm. Did you kill him because you wanted to, or because you felt like you had no choice? It wasn't supposed to happen. Her words tumbled out in gasps. I panicked. He turned his back. I saw the wrench, and I just wanted him to stop. I just wanted my life back. Silence filled the room, heavy but strangely freeing. When she finally looked up, her eyes swollen and red, Marcus nodded slowly, understanding, not absolving. Thank you for telling me, he said. We'll handle this the right way. And for the first time in weeks, Linda felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Relief. Not freedom. Not forgiveness. But the first fragile breath of a truth finally spoken. The courtroom felt colder than any prison block Linda Parker had ever walked. The polished wood, the rows of spectators, the silent anticipation. They formed a different kind of cage, one where every breath she took was measured, analyzed, judged. Linda sat at the defense table in a plain gray dress, her back straight but her eyes hollow, fixed on a point far beyond the judge's bench. The prosecution laid out their narrative with sharp, deliberate precision. A correctional officer who broke the most sacred boundary. An illicit affair. Forbidden notes. Secret meetings in the library. And finally, the brutal killing of inmate Adrian Cole, struck repeatedly with a wrench in a moment the prosecutor called a calculated act disguised as panic. Each word chipped away at what little remained of Linda's composure. She didn't deny what she had done. She couldn't. But hearing her life reduced to a sequence of mistakes and impulses, stripped of fear and manipulation and broken psychology, it hurt more than the handcuffs ever had. Her former colleagues testified one by one. Some spoke with disappointment, others with disbelief. I never thought someone like her, someone so strict with the rules, could fall like that, a guard muttered from the witness stand. Dr. Hannah Reed, however, walked a finer line. Calm, steady, compassionate, she spoke of Linda's deteriorating emotional state, the warning signs of manipulation, the predatory charm Adrian had perfected long before Linda ever set foot in the high-security unit. But even her careful testimony couldn't rewrite the fact that a man was dead, and Linda had delivered the fatal blows. When it was the defense's turn, Linda's lawyer argued that the killing had not been premeditated, that it was the desperate act of a woman cornered by threats, blackmail, and psychological coercion. He emphasized the phone Adrian had hidden, the photographs, the leverage he held over her career and freedom. But the prosecution countered expertly. Fear may explain the first swing. It does not explain the fourth or the fifth. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was swift and devastating. Guilty on all counts. Linda didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She simply inhaled one slow, resigned breath, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in a women's maximum security facility. No leniency, no suspended time, just a clean, solemn acknowledgement of the consequences she could never escape. As she was escorted out, she caught a glimpse of Detective Marcus Lewis in the back row. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked heartbroken because the truth he uncovered had led not to justice, but to tragedy. In the months that followed, Linda's case became a cautionary tale in law enforcement training programs across the country. A reminder of how vulnerability can become a weapon, how manipulation thrives in silence, how a single emotional misstep can spiral into a collapse of ethics, identity, and ultimately a life. Her story lived on not as a scandal, but as a warning. Some prisons aren't made of concrete and bars. Some are built quietly inside the heart. And once you're locked in, there's no easy way out.